Imagine losing everything you've worked for, only to be saved by the last person you ever expected. This is the story of courage, redemption, and one man's fight to protect his team from being replaced. What happens next will leave you speechless. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. The office buzzed with the usual hum of keyboards clicking and muted conversations, but today an uneasy tension hung in the air. Employees clustered together in corners, their hushed voices carrying an unsettling message. Whispers of impending layoffs floated through the room. "The Honey workers are coming," one colleague murmured, their voice barely above a whisper, yet loud enough to deepen the growing sense of dread. Lily sat in the break room, her coffee untouched on the table in front of her. In her early 40s, with years of dedication to the company under her belt, she had always been a pillar of resilience. But now, her pale face betrayed the fear gripping her. Her colleagues exchanged worried glances, their unease mirroring hers. She could hear their murmurs, speculating about who would be replaced and when. "They'll throw us out for cheaper labor," Lily said softly, her voice heavy with despair. Her words hung in the room, bitter and final, a reflection of the fear shared by so many. From his desk across the hall, James heard her. A man in his early 40s, his calm exterior masked a well of understanding. He had been here before, seen the devastation outsourcing could bring. The quiet desperation in Lily's voice struck a chord. He looked around the room, seeing the faces of his colleagues, some resigned, others anxious. And he knew he couldn't let it happen again. Without a word, James made a silent decision. It wasn't anger that filled him, but a deep, unwavering determination. For Lily, for the others, for the company he believed in, he would fight. The office, once a place of routine and security, had become a hive of uncertainty. The murmur of voices was louder than usual, filled with anxious speculations and fragmented conversations. Rumors had turned into something much darker, a looming reality that threatened to uproot lives. The announcement came during a tense morning meeting, delivered by a polished manager who couldn't mask the gravity of what was to follow. "We are implementing cost-cutting measures to ensure competitiveness in today's market," the manager stated, his tone measured and devoid of emotion. "This includes integrating H1B visa workers into key roles within the organization." A collective hush fell over the room, heavy with disbelief and unspoken fears. Employees exchanged glances, some visibly stunned, others already processing what this meant. For Lily, the words hit like a physical blow. She sat frozen, staring at the floor, her mind racing. The thought of losing her job, her only source of stability, sent waves of dread coursing through her. Lily was a single mother of two, a woman who had given the last 15 years of her life to this company. Her dedication was unquestionable, her performance consistently praised. Yet, none of that seemed to matter now. Her mortgage loomed, her children's education hung in the balance, and the safety net she thought she had built over the years felt terrifyingly fragile. She tried to focus on the voices around her, but they blended into a blur of rising panic. In the break room later, she found herself sitting with her friend Karen. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around her coffee cup, more for comfort than warmth. "It feels like they're just throwing us away," she said, her voice breaking. "After everything we've done for this place, how can they even consider this?" Karen placed a comforting hand on Lily's arm. "They don't see us as people, Lily. To them, we're just numbers." Nearby, James overheard their conversation. He remained quiet, his face unreadable, but his thoughts were anything but calm. He had seen this before, more times than he cared to count. Growing up, James had watched his father lose his factory job when the company decided to move operations overseas. The loss had devastated their family, leaving his father unemployed for years. James still remembered the nights when his parents sat at the kitchen table, whispering about how they would pay the bills. He had vowed never to let that happen to anyone he cared about. James's journey to his current position had been anything but easy. Starting as a janitor at another company, he had worked his way up, earning respect and recognition for his grit and intelligence. He knew the value of hard work and the dignity it brought, and he understood better than most what was at stake for his colleagues. Watching Lily's distress brought back memories he had tried to bury, and he knew he couldn't stand by and do nothing. The tension in the office grew unbearable. That afternoon, an email arrived in every employee's inbox with the subject line, "Department Restructuring Meeting." The words alone were enough to send a wave of panic through the team. Lily read the message twice, hoping she had misunderstood, but the reality was clear. Her future and the future of so many others was in jeopardy. She spent the rest of the day distracted, her thoughts a whirlwind of worst-case scenarios. What would she tell her children? How would she afford the mortgage? The questions came faster than she could answer them, each one adding to the suffocating pressure she felt. James watched from across the office, noting the change in her posture, the way she rushed through conversations, avoiding eye contact. He saw it not just in Lily, but in the faces of his other colleagues. The tension was universal, but for some, like Lily, it was crippling. He recognized the fear because he had lived it. He had watched it consume his father, turning a once proud man into someone who doubted his worth. That night, James sat at his kitchen table, staring at the blinking cursor on his laptop. He thought of his father, of the promises he had made to himself back then. He couldn't let history repeat itself. The faces of his colleagues flashed in his mind. Lily's pale, tear-streaked face lingered the longest. This wasn't just about jobs. It was about people, about families who depended on those jobs for their survival. James began to research. He combed through company records, financial statements, and industry reports. What he found was unsurprising, but infuriating. The proposed H1B hires were not only underqualified, but would require extensive training, negating any short-term savings. Worse, similar strategies in other companies had led to disastrous results, with higher turnover rates, diminished productivity, and even client dissatisfaction. As he compiled his findings, James thought about the stories that couldn't be quantified. The impact on families, the mental toll of unemployment, the erosion of trust in leadership. He knew that numbers alone wouldn't be enough to make his case. He needed to remind the company of the human cost of their decision. The next morning, James arrived at the office early, his determination unwavering. He noticed Lily walking in, her shoulders hunched under the weight of her fears. She barely acknowledged him as she passed, but that didn't matter. What mattered was what he planned to do. He wasn't just fighting for her, he was fighting for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of corporate indifference. As James settled into his desk, The office buzzed with speculation about the upcoming meeting. Employees whispered in hushed tones, their anxiety palpable. James tuned it all out, focusing instead on the presentation he was preparing. He didn't know if management would listen, but he knew he had to try. By the time the meeting was called, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. James gathered his materials, his mind racing with everything he wanted to say. He wasn't just walking into a meeting, he was walking into a battle. For Lily, for his colleagues, and for the dignity of the work they had all given so much to. It wasn't just about numbers, it was about people, and James was ready to remind them of that. Lily sat in the dimly lit restroom, her back against the cold wall, her head buried in her hands. The email confirming her inclusion on the layoff list had been the final blow. She had read it twice, hoping she had misunderstood, but the stark reality remained. Nearly 2 decades of dedication to the company, countless late nights and weekends sacrificed, meant nothing now. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks, her body trembling under the weight of despair. She thought of her children waiting at home, unaware of the storm brewing in their mother's life. She pictured their innocent faces lighting up as they shared stories about their day. How could she explain to them that the roof over their heads, their education, and their dreams were now in jeopardy? Her mind raced through the bills stacked on her kitchen counter, the mortgage payments she couldn't miss, and the thought of starting over in a job market that seemed increasingly unforgiving. James, passing by the restroom, heard the faint sound of stifled sobs. He paused, his hand tightening around the stack of papers he carried. Over the past few days, he had noticed Lily's transformation. Once composed and efficient, she now moved through the office like a shadow of herself. Her laughter, once a rare but genuine presence, had disappeared. Her once confident demeanor had given way to hurried steps and avoiding eye contact. He recognized the signs all too well. They mirrored what he had seen in his father years ago. James remembered the nights his father sat in the dim glow of the kitchen, head bowed in silence. The factory closure had ripped apart the foundation of their family's life. The man who once carried himself with pride and purpose had been reduced to a figure weighed down by helplessness and guilt. James still felt the sting of those memories, and seeing Lily in the same state reignited the fire in him. Returning to his desk, James opened his laptop, his jaw set with determination. He began poring over company records and financial reports. The deeper he dug, the more inconsistencies he uncovered. The proposed H1B workers were indeed cheaper on paper, but their qualifications didn't align with the demands of the roles they were expected to fill. The cost of training and the inevitable mistakes that would follow were glaring red flags. He found case studies from other companies that had pursued similar strategies, only to suffer project delays, rising expenses, and the erosion of client trust. James worked late into the night, his office illuminated by the pale glow of his screen. He methodically compiled his findings, creating a report that detailed the potential risks of the outsourcing plan. He didn't stop at the numbers. He knew those alone wouldn't be enough. He added testimonials from clients who valued consistency in relationships with long-standing employees. He included examples of companies that had faced public backlash for similar decisions. He thought of his colleagues, their faces flashing in his mind, and made sure to highlight the irreplaceable value of their expertise and dedication. As he worked, memories of his father fueled him. He remembered the humiliation his father felt while standing in unemployment lines, the strain it placed on their family, and the quiet dignity his father had tried to maintain despite everything. James clenched his fists, channeling those emotions into his work. He couldn't let this happen to anyone else, not if he could help it. The next morning, James stood outside the office building, clutching his report. The air was crisp, and the rising sun painted the horizon with streaks of orange and gold. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This wasn't just about him. It was about everyone whose livelihood was at stake. He walked into the office with purpose, heading straight for the management floor. The receptionist glanced at him curiously as he requested a meeting with the senior team. Hours later, James found himself sitting across from three executives in a sleek, glass-walled conference room. The atmosphere was cold and professional, but James felt the weight of his colleagues' hopes resting on his shoulders. He began his presentation with the facts. Laying out the financial inefficiencies of the outsourcing plan, his voice was calm but firm as he pointed to the data showing how H1B workers, while cost-efficient on paper, lacked the specialized skills required for the company's complex systems. He highlighted the hidden costs of training, the potential for project delays, and the likely decline in client satisfaction. The executives exchanged skeptical glances, their expressions betraying doubt. James anticipated this. He shifted gears, bringing up examples of companies that had suffered public relations disasters after similar moves. He emphasized the damage to employee morale and the loss of trust that inevitably followed. Finally, he paused, looking directly at the executives. His voice softened, carrying an emotional weight that was impossible to ignore. This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about the people who have built this company, who've given their time, energy, and dedication to make it what it is. I've seen what happens when decisions like these are made without considering the human cost. It tears the human cost to deliver this. We're failing as a society, and we have a chance to do better. The room fell silent. For a moment, James thought he might have overstepped, but he held his ground, meeting the executive's eyes with quiet resolve. One of them, a woman who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. "You've given us a lot to think about," she said, her tone measured but thoughtful. James nodded, gathering his papers. He left the room with his heart pounding, unsure of whether he had made an impact. But he knew he had done everything he could. As he walked back to his desk, he glanced at Lily, who was staring blankly at her monitor. She didn't notice him, but that didn't matter. He hadn't done this for recognition. He had done it because it was right. That evening, James sat alone in his apartment, reflecting on the day. He thought of his father, of the sacrifices his family had made, and of the chance he had to prevent someone else from enduring the same pain. The fight wasn't over, but he felt a flicker of hope. For Lily, for his colleagues, and for himself. He would keep pushing forward. The air in the boardroom was heavy with tension. James sat at one end of the long table, his laptop open, and his carefully prepared presentation ready to go. Across from him sat the senior management team, men and women in suits who carried the weight of decisions that would shape the company's future. Their expressions ranged from polite curiosity to mild disinterest, but James wasn't deterred. He had come too far to let this opportunity slip away. He began calmly, pulling up the first slide. His voice was steady as he outlined the financial and operational risks of replacing experienced workers with underqualified H1B employees. "On the surface, it looks like cost savings," he said, gesturing to a graph showing projected expenses. "But the hidden costs are far greater. Training these workers to match the productivity of our current team will take months, if not years. During that time, deadlines will be missed, and client trust will erode. One of the executives leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. But we've seen other companies make this transition successfully, he said. What makes us different? James clicked to the next slide, showing case studies of companies that had pursued similar outsourcing strategies. These are real examples of what can happen when short-term savings are prioritized over long-term stability, he said. Delays, higher turnover rates, loss of key clients. The companies ended up spending more to fix the problems than they saved in the first place. The room grew quieter as James moved through his findings, but he could sense the skepticism lingering in the air. He knew this was the moment to change tactics. Taking a deep breath, he closed his laptop and spoke from the heart. This isn't just about spreadsheets and bottom lines, he said, his voice softer now but filled with conviction. It's about people. Families depend on these jobs. Families who've given everything to this company, who've built it with their dedication and hard work. I've seen what happens when decisions like this are made without considering the human cost. My father lost his job to outsourcing when I was a teenager. It destroyed him. It destroyed my family. We were lucky to survive. His eyes swept across the room, meeting each executive's gaze. If we keep throwing away our own, what kind of company are we? What kind of country are we? We have a chance to do the right thing here, not just for the people in this building, but for the values we claim to stand for. The room was silent for a moment. James couldn't tell if it was the kind of silence that preceded dismissal or the kind that signaled deep thought. Finally, the woman at the head of the table, who had been listening intently, leaned forward. Her voice was measured but thoughtful. "You've given us a lot to think about," she said. "Thank you for your honesty." Another executive, clearly moved, added, "We'll take this under serious consideration. Your points are well made." James nodded, gathering his materials. He left the room with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. He had done everything he could, but now the decision was out of his hands. Word spread quickly through the office about James's bold stand. Lily, who had been quietly stewing in her despair, overheard snippets of conversation in the break room. "Did you hear what James did?" someone whispered. "He went toe-to-toe with management, laid out all the reasons the layoffs are a bad idea." Another voice chimed in. "I didn't know he cared so much. I always thought he kept to himself." Lily felt a mix of disbelief and curiosity. James, the man she had barely spoken to, the man she had dismissed as aloof and unrelatable, had stood up for her and everyone else? She couldn't wrap her head around it. Later that afternoon, as James returned to his desk, Lily approached him hesitantly. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain. James cut her off with a small, kind smile. "Millie, you don't have to thank me. This wasn't just for you. It's for all of us. We're in this together." She nodded, her cheeks flushing with a mix of gratitude and guilt. "I've been so wrong about you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I judged you without ever really knowing you. And yet, you fought for me. Damn it. What in the future?" My mind raced. "I'm not being truly you." James shook his head gently. "What matters is that we're here now, working towards something better. That's all I care about." For the first time in weeks, Lily felt a glimmer of hope. The weight on her shoulders didn't disappear, but it felt a little lighter knowing someone had stood up for her. She walked back to her desk, her thoughts swirling. James's actions forced her to confront not just her biases, but her own capacity for change. The next day, an email arrived in everyone's inbox. Update on workforce strategy. The subject line alone sent a ripple of anticipation through the office. Lily clicked it with trembling fingers, her heart pounding as she scanned the text. Management had decided to pause the layoffs and reevaluate the outsourcing plan. Instead, they would invest in upskilling their existing employees, providing training programs to help them adapt to new challenges. Cheers erupted around the office as the news spread. Colleagues clapped each other on the back, their relief palpable. Some even approached James, thanking him for his courage and dedication. He accepted their gratitude with humility, brushing off their praise with a quiet, "It was the right thing to do." Lily watched from a distance, her heart swelling with admiration. She realized that James's strength wasn't just in his actions, but in his humility and unwavering commitment to others. For the first time, she saw him not as a colleague she barely knew, but as someone who had changed the course of her life. That evening, as she walked to her car, Lily paused and looked back at the office building. It no longer felt like the cold, impersonal place it had become in recent weeks. It felt, once again, like a home, a place where people looked out for one another, and she knew she had James to thank for that. The announcement came early on a crisp morning, breaking the tension that had gripped the office for weeks. Management sent out a company-wide email that read, "Update on workforce strategy." Employees opened it with bated breath, fearing the worst. But as Lily read the words, her heart leapt with relief. Management had decided to pause the layoffs. The email detailed a plan to launch a workforce training initiative aimed at upskilling current employees rather than replacing them. The company would invest in its people, ensuring they had the tools and knowledge to meet new challenges. The message ended with a simple acknowledgement. This decision reflects the valuable contributions of our team and our commitment to their growth. The reaction in the office was electric. Cheers and applause broke out as colleagues hugged and exchanged congratulations. Some sat quietly, absorbing the news with tears in their eyes. Lily was one of them. She wiped her face with trembling hands, her relief mingling with a profound sense of gratitude. She glanced across the room to James, who sat at his desk, calmly reading the email. His expression was unreadable, but Lily knew the decision was a direct result of his courage. Over the next few days, the office slowly returned to a sense of normality. The anxiety that had shadowed every interaction was replaced by a cautious optimism. Employees began signing up for training sessions, eager to prove their worth and embrace the new opportunities the company was offering. Lily, too, enrolled in several courses, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. But beyond her professional life, Lily couldn't stop thinking about James. His actions had challenged her deeply held assumptions and forced her to confront her own biases. She had spent years avoiding him, judging him based on superficial impressions, never bothering to know the person behind the quiet demeanor. Yet he had been the one to stand up for her when it mattered most. One afternoon, as the office buzzed with renewed energy, Lily approached James at his desk. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin. He looked up from his work and offered her a small, reassuring smile. "James," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for what you did for the team, but for me. I misjudged you." For years, I thought I knew who you were, but I never really took the time to see you. And yet, you stood up for me. For all of us." James leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Lily, I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do. We're all in this together, and I couldn't just sit back and watch while people's lives were turned upside down." Her eyes glistened with tears as she nodded. "You taught me something I'll never forget. I've been so quick to judge, to assume the worst about people. But you showed me that actions speak louder than anything else. Thank you for that." James gave a slight shrug, his humility shining through. It's never too late to change how we see the world. What matters is that we move forward together. That conversation stayed with Lily, inspiring her to make changes in her own life. She began volunteering at a local employment center, helping displaced workers find new opportunities. She used her experience to guide others, offering them hope and practical tools to rebuild their lives. Every time she saw someone walk out of the center with a renewed sense of purpose, she thought of James and the ripple effect his actions had set in motion. Meanwhile, James continued his work with quiet determination. Despite the praise and gratitude he received from his colleagues, he remained focused on ensuring the success of the training initiative. He worked closely with HR to design programs that met the needs of the team, often staying late to review feedback and suggest improvements. For him, it wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about making sure the company stayed true to its commitment to its people. On New Year's Eve, Lily hosted a small celebration at her home. She invited James, along with a few colleagues who had been deeply impacted by the events of the past months. The atmosphere was warm and joyful, filled with laughter and stories of perseverance. The Christmas lights on the tree twinkled softly, casting a golden glow over the room. As the clock neared midnight, Lily stood and raised her glass. The room fell quiet as everyone turned their attention to her. Lily nodded. She understood. "I want to make a toast," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This year has been one of the hardest I've ever faced. There were moments when I felt completely lost, like everything was falling apart. But then, something incredible happened. Someone stood up when no one else would. Someone reminded us all of what it means to have courage and to care for one another. James, this toast is for you, for your kindness, your strength, and your belief in all of us." The room erupted into applause as James looked down, clearly humbled by the recognition. He raised his own glass, his voice calm but resolute. "To all of you, to the strength we find in each other, and to standing up for what's right. Here's to a brighter future." As the clock struck midnight, the room filled with cheers and the sound of clinking glasses. Lily looked around at the smiling faces of her friends and colleagues, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. What had begun as a moment of despair had transformed into a journey of hope, unity, and second chances. That night, as James walked home, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He thought of his father, of the struggles his family had endured, and of the promise he had made to himself all those years ago. He had kept that promise, and in doing so, he had helped others find their strength. The experience left an indelible mark on everyone involved. Lily's transformation inspired others in the office to reevaluate their own perspectives. The company's decision to invest in its workforce became a model for other businesses in the industry, proving that doing the right thing could also be the smart thing. For James, the journey wasn't about one act of kindness. It was about the lasting impact of choosing to stand up for others. And for Lily, it was a lesson in humility, empathy, and the power of seeing beyond the surface. Together, they reminded everyone that even in the face of adversity, courage and compassion could pave the way for a better future. This story is a powerful reminder that kindness and courage can break through the toughest barriers, transforming lives and inspiring change in ways we least expect. James's unwavering determination to fight for his colleagues teaches us that standing up for what's right, valuing people over profits, and embracing empathy can lead to redemption and hope for all involved. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment of courage that changed everything? Perhaps it was an act of kindness that restored your faith in humanity, or a moment when someone stood up for what was right. Share your story in the comments below, and let's inspire one another to choose compassion, unity, and a brighter future. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Together we can create a world where everyone feels seen, valued, and supported. Let's make a difference, one story at a time.